Darius Wade was 38 years old, a structural engineer who built his consulting firm from a second mortgage, and 12 years of showing up before sunrise. He had never raised his voice at his wife, never given either of them a reason not to trust him. That was the life he had built. Steady, deliberate, load-bearing. Then, one evening, Patricia sat across from him at their kitchen table, not beside him, across from him, and pressed play on a voice memo. Her sister Brianna's voice came through the speaker, claiming Darius had gotten her pregnant. In his own house, 2 months prior, Darius sat completely still, not because he was guilty, but because an innocent man hearing a lie that specific doesn't get angry first. He gets suspicious. Someone had built this. Someone had given Brianna exactly the right detail to make it land, and the only person who knew him well enough to do that was sitting 3 feet away, watching his face. What Darius did next would cost 4 people everything they thought they had secured. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The blueprints were still warm from the truck cab when Darius Wade stepped through his front door. He set them on the bench by the entrance, carefully, the way he set everything down that mattered, and knocked the dust from his boots against the doorframe. Red Georgia clay, stubborn and fine, drifted to the porch. He watched it settle, and felt the slow release of a man coming in from a day that had gone the way a good day goes. Steady. Productive. Real. The Morrow Street project was 3 weeks ahead of schedule. He had walked the site that afternoon and pressed his thumb into the fresh concrete of the eastern retaining wall and felt it give back exactly the resistance it was supposed to give back. That feeling of a thing holding up the way you built it to hold up was the reason he had gotten into this work in the first place. Some men chased money. Some chased titles. Darius had always chased that feeling. He hung his hard hat on the hook inside the door. 12 years of marriage had taught him that Patricia did not love construction dust on the furniture. And 12 years of loving her had made it a habit to be careful. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when something is being held inside them. Darius noticed it the way he noticed everything, not with alarm, just with the quiet part of his brain that was always running in the background, cataloging. Patricia was in the kitchen when he came in. She was standing at the counter with her phone face down beside the cutting board and a glass of water she had not touched. She smiled when she saw him. It was a real smile, he thought, and then immediately wondered why he had needed to think about whether it was real. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He kissed her cheek. "Good day?" "Long day." She picked up the glass, set it back down. "Yours?" "Good one. Morrow Street is holding." "That's good," she said. She was already turning back toward the counter. The phone stayed face down. They moved through the kitchen together for a while, him at the refrigerator, her near the stove, with the ease of 2 people who had shared a space long enough to stop running into each other. That ease was something Darius had always valued. It was the kind of thing that got built slowly, without drama, one quiet evening at a time. He valued it the same way he valued the retaining wall. Steady, solid, reliable. Her phone buzzed once against the counter. She turned it over, looked at the screen, and turned it back face down. She excused herself from the kitchen without explaining why. Darius cut an apple and ate it standing at the counter. He listened to her footsteps move toward the bedroom. He heard the bedroom door close. He filed it away. Brianna arrived at 7:20 without calling. She usually didn't call. Patricia always said to be patient with her. "She's going through something, Darius. She just needs to know she has somewhere to land." And so over 12 years, he had learned to leave the light on for her, metaphorically speaking. He offered her coffee when she came in. She took the mug, but didn't settle the way she usually settled. She didn't drop her bag. She didn't kick her shoes off and fold herself into the corner of the couch. She stood near the kitchen island with her shoulders angled toward the door, and her eyes moving to Patricia every few seconds, like a woman keeping track of where the exit was. She barely looked at Darius at all. He asked how she was doing. She said fine. He asked about the apartment. She had moved 3 months ago, a new place across town. She said it was fine. One-word answers, each one handed over like she was paying a toll. He left them to talk. He went to his office down the hall, sat at the drafting table, and did not hear much of what was said. Just the low, close sound of two women speaking quietly in a way that was not meant to carry. 40 minutes later, he heard the front door. He came out to say goodbye. Brianna was already at the threshold, her back to him, and Patricia was holding her. Not the loose, easy hug of sisters who would see each other again in a week. Something longer than that. Something that asked more of both of them. Brianna's hands gripped the back of Patricia's shirt. Her knuckles were pale. Then she was gone. Tail lights backing out of the driveway. Patricia standing in the open doorway, watching the car until it turned the corner and disappeared. Darius stood behind her. He watched his wife's face in profile, the way the porch light caught the line of her jaw. The expression there was not worry. It was not the soft sadness of a sister watching a struggling sibling drive away. It was resolve. The particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and arrived, finally, at the far side of it. She closed the door. She turned and looked at him, and the expression was gone, replaced by something warmer and more familiar. "I'm going to take a bath," she said. "Don't stay up too late." He nodded. He went back to his drafting table. The blueprints in front of him were the same ones he had been proud of an hour ago. He looked at the lines and could not find them. Something was off. He could not name it. He could not point to it the way he could point to a stress fracture in a wall and say, "There, that's where it's failing." It was quieter than that, vaguer. The feeling of a man standing in a building that looks fine but has stopped sounding right underfoot. He rolled the blueprints up. He turned off the desk lamp. He went to bed. Patricia's breathing beside him was slow, and even by the time he settled in. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the house. He could not sleep for a while. When he finally did, it was the thin, unsatisfying sleep of a man whose mind had not finished working. 3 days passed the way ordinary days do. Work, meals, the small routines of a household running on habit. Patricia left early. Darius left earlier. They shared dinners that were quiet in ways that felt normal until he thought about them too long, and then they felt like something else. On the third evening she came home and walked past him into the kitchen and set her bag down on the counter. She pulled out the chair directly across the table from where he was sitting. Not beside him. Across. She sat down and folded her hands and looked at him with an expression he had never quite seen on her face before. Careful and rehearsed, and somewhere behind both of those things. Something he could not name. "I need to show you something," she said. He set down his coffee. She placed her phone on the table between them and pressed play. Brianna's voice came out of the small speaker, thin and slightly trembling, the way voices sound when someone has practiced emotion without quite landing on the real thing. "Your husband did this to me 2 months ago, in your house. I didn't want to tell you, Pat, but I can't keep carrying this alone." The recording ended. The kitchen was very quiet. Darius sat with the words for a moment, the way you sit in the seconds after a car accident. Not processing, not reacting, just suspended in the space between what just happened and what it means. His hands were still around the coffee mug. The mug was still warm. Then something happened that he had not expected. He had expected anger. He had braced for it without knowing he was bracing. The instinctive preparation of a man who has always known how to meet a problem head-on. But anger did not come. What came instead was vertigo, a slow, disorienting tilt, like the floor had shifted a fraction of an inch. Not enough to fall, just enough to make him doubt every surface in the room. Because what he was hearing did not connect to anything, not to any version of his own life. Not to any night 2 months ago or 4 months ago or in the entire 12 years he had shared a home with this woman and known Brianna as her little sister, the one who arrived unannounced, the one he made coffee for, the one he had driven to urgent care once when Patricia was out of town, and Brianna had called with a high fever and no one else to call. That woman, that relationship, that history. The accusation floated in the room completely unattached. He could not find the place inside his own experience where it was supposed to connect, because there was no such place. He looked at the phone. He looked at Patricia. "Play it again," he said. She did. He listened. The same thin voice, the same careful trembling. He listened to it the way he listened to a structure that was telling him something, not for the content this time, but for what was underneath the content. Then he set the question of Brianna aside entirely, because the question of Brianna was almost beside the point right now. He knew what he had done and not done. That was not the part that required examination. The part that required examination was this. Why? Why is she saying this? He did not say it loudly. He said it the way you say something when you genuinely need the answer. Not as an accusation, not as a performance of innocence, but as a real question from a man trying to find the logic in something that has no logic yet. What does she want from this? What is this supposed to do? Patricia looked at him across the table. "I don't know what to believe," she said. It was a quiet sentence, 6 words, and it landed like something physical, not the sharp impact of a blow, but the slow, spreading weight of one. He had not expected, of course, I believe you. He was not a man who expected things to be handed to him, but he had expected his wife of 12 years to know him well enough to not sit across from him with folded hands and, "I don't know what to believe." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pushed back his chair and stood up. "I'm going to talk to Brianna," he said. "Tonight." "Darius." Patricia's voice was steady. "Wait. Think about this first. If you go over there tonight and say something you can't take back—" "I'm not going to say anything I can't take back." He picked up his keys from the counter. "I'm going to ask her to explain herself. Just wait, please." "You're upset." "I'm not upset." He said it quietly, without heat, because it was true. He was not upset. He was something colder and more focused than upset. He was a man who had just found a crack in a wall and needed to know how deep it ran. He walked to the door. He walked out. Brianna's building was a 3-story walk-up on the east side of Garfield Avenue, the kind of place where the hallway lights flickered, and the carpet smell told you something about the previous tenants. Darius had been here twice before, both times with Patricia. Both times he had waited in the car. He knocked. She opened the door almost immediately. No shuffling from the back of the apartment, no chain sliding free, no "Who is it?" called through the wood. Just the door swinging open, and Brianna standing in the frame in an oversized sweatshirt, with her arms crossed, and her face arranged into something that wanted to look surprised, and wasn't. That was the first thing he registered. She was expecting him. He filed it without showing it. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. He came in. The apartment was small and dim, a lamp on in the corner, the television off. A glass of water sat on the coffee table. She had been sitting here waiting, maybe rehearsing. He did not know yet how much she had prepared, but the unlocked expectation on her face when she opened the door told him she had prepared something. He sat in the chair across from the couch, same geometry as the kitchen table 40 minutes ago. He was noticing he kept ending up across from people tonight. Brianna sat on the couch and pulled her knees up slightly. Not fully. just enough to make herself smaller. He recognized the posture. He had seen it in clients who were about to tell him something they knew he wasn't going to like. "I need you to tell me," he said. "Not through a recording. Not through Patricia. To me, right now. With me sitting here looking at you. Tell me what you're claiming." She looked at the coffee table. "Darius!" "Look at me, Brianna." She did. "Tell me." She began to talk. Her voice had some of the same texture as the recording. Careful, rehearsed. But in person it was harder to maintain. In person, she had to look at his face. He watched her talk, and he did not interrupt, and he did not react. Because reacting was not the job right now. Listening was the job. Finding the shape of the thing was the job. She placed the night on a Thursday. 2 months ago. She said Patricia had been at a conference, and Darius had called her to come over for dinner. She said things progressed. He let her finish. Then he started pressing. Quietly, methodically. "Which Thursday?" he asked. She named a date. He stored it. "What did we eat?" A pause. Small. "Pasta, I think." "What did we talk about before dinner?" Longer pause. Her eyes moved left. I mean, just regular stuff. Your work. I don't remember exactly." "What was on television?" She blinked. "I don't think we had the TV on." "What was I wearing?" It came out of her mouth without hesitation. "A gray shirt. One of those fitted ones you wear on weekends." He looked at her. She seemed to sense something had shifted, because her expression did a complicated thing. A recalibration. Too fast and too visible. She added, "And jeans, I think. Dark jeans." But he had already heard what he needed to hear, because every other answer had come with friction. Hesitation. The natural roughness of a person trying to retrieve something real from memory. The pasta she thought she remembered. The conversation she didn't remember exactly. The television she didn't think was on. The gray shirt had come out clean and fast and specific. The way a fact comes out when someone has practiced saying it until it sounds like a memory instead of a line. Someone gave her that detail. Someone who knew his wardrobe and knew which piece of it sounded right. He leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees. "Brianna," he said. "Who told you to do this?" "Nobody told me anything." Her voice was firm. Her hands were not. "Someone gave you that shirt." He said it without inflection. A statement, not a question. Everything else you had to think about. The shirt came out ready. Someone who has been in my house and knows what I wear handed you that detail so the story would land. She shook her head. Her jaw was tight. But her eyes did something she couldn't control. A flicker, a crack in the surface, something true showing through for just a second before she pulled the performance back down over it. He saw it. She knew he saw it. He stood up. "Whatever you were promised for this," he said, "it isn't worth what's coming." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked to the door, opened it, and walked out into the flickering hallway. He sat in his car in Brianna's parking lot for 2 full minutes without starting the engine. The night was quiet around him, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the distant compression of a passing bus. Then he drove home. He did not turn on the radio. He did not call Patricia. He sat with the shape of what he had just learned and let it arrange itself correctly, because he was a man who knew better than to act on a half-read blueprint. By the time he pulled into his own driveway, the shape was clear. This was not about Brianna. Brianna was not the architect here. Brianna was a delivery mechanism, the hand that held the thing, not the person who built it. Someone else had constructed this accusation, selected the details, prepared the script, and handed it to a woman desperate enough to use it. Someone who had been inside his house. Someone who knew what he wore on weekends. Someone close. He picked up his phone and called Cornell. His father answered on the second ring. "You good?" "She was coached, Dad." He kept his voice level. One detail was too clean. The gray shirt. Everything else she had to dig for. That one she had ready. Cornell was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man who thinks before he speaks. Then, someone who knows you built this, he said. Someone close enough to know what's in your closet. Yeah. You know what that means. I know what it means. Another silence, the kind that held something heavy, without either of them needing to say it out loud. What's your next step? Cornell asked. I'm calling Andrea. He ended the call. He stared at the dark front of his house for a moment. The house he had carried the first mortgage on alone. The house he had built a life inside of. And then he scrolled to Andrea Price's name and pressed call. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice was alert despite the hour. Darius, I need your help, he said. Someone built something that was supposed to land on me. I need to find out who constructed it and why. A brief pause. Then, without softness, without ceremony, tell me everything. Andrea Price's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled like old paper and good coffee. The waiting room had 2 chairs and a rubber plant that had survived longer than most of her clients' marriages. Darius had been here once before, 7 years ago, when a contractor tried to void a signed agreement, and Andrea had taken the man apart in mediation so efficiently that he left the table looking like he'd walked into a door. She was already at her desk when Darius arrived at 8:15. No small talk. She pointed at the chair across from her, and he sat down. He walked her through all of it. The voice memo. Patricia sitting across from him at the kitchen table. Not beside him. Across. Brianna's apartment. The unlocked door. The rehearsed performance that fell apart under basic questions. The gray shirt. How fast it came out. How different it sounded from every other answer. Patricia's response when he said he was going to Brianna directly? Wait. Think. Don't make this worse. The specific language of a woman managing a situation rather than a wife who believed her husband. Andrea listened without interrupting. She wrote on a legal pad in tight, precise lines. When he finished, she looked at what she had written, and then looked at him. You said her reaction was measured, she said. Too measured. Not a woman in shock. Not even close. Andrea set her pen down. Then the accusation wasn't the main event. It was cover for something else she needed time to finish. She tapped the legal pad once. I want a PI on her schedule. 18 months back. Financial footprint outside your joint accounts. Any pattern that doesn't match what she's been telling you. That's what I need, Darius said. I'll make a call today. She paused. You're going home tonight. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Then you say nothing. You maintain everything exactly as it was. You eat dinner, you answer questions. You go to work. You give her no reason to move faster than she's already moving. She picked her pen back up. Can you do that? He thought about sitting across from Patricia at that kitchen table. The controlled expression. The performance of a wounded wife. Yes, he said. I can do that. He did it for 10 days. He came home. He cooked on the nights it was his turn. He asked Patricia about her day and listened to her answers with the same face he had always given her. Open, present, unhurried. He passed her the salt. He watched a documentary with her on a Tuesday night, and when she fell asleep against his shoulder, he stayed still and stared at the ceiling and catalogued everything. Her phone never left her hand or her pocket. She kept the screen angled away from him with the unconscious habit of someone who had been doing it long enough that it no longer required thought. She took calls in the bathroom, short calls, efficient. On Thursday evenings, she worked late. She had worked late on Thursdays for as long as Darius could now remember, and he had accepted that the way he accepted the rest of her schedule, as the routine of a busy woman in a demanding job. He understood demanding work. He had never questioned it. He questioned it now. He watched the way she moved through the house in those 10 days. There was something different about it. a quality he had registered before without knowing what to call it. She moved like a woman who had already arrived somewhere in her mind, settled into a future she hadn't told him about yet. The lightness of a decision already made. He recognized it now for what it was. He had just been too close to see it clearly before. The report arrived on a Thursday morning. The PI, a careful, quiet man named Marcus that Andrea had used for years, sent a sealed envelope to Andrea's office. She called Darius at 10 and told him it was ready. He picked it up on his lunch break. He did not take it inside. He sat in his car in the parking structure beside his office building, and he opened the envelope. Victor Ose, hospital CFO, Patricia's direct professional superior, 14 months. The documentation was thorough and specific. Call logs showing contact several times a week, including evenings and early mornings. Hotel receipts booked under a corporate card, a different hotel each time, a detail that spoke to deliberate practice, a pattern of Thursday evenings that lined up with Patricia's late nights in a column so clean and consistent it looked like a calendar entry. This was not a recent thing. This was not a mistake or a moment. This had been running for over a year. Scheduled, sustained, and careful. A man who knew how to manage institutional resources had applied the same precision to managing an affair. Darius read through the file twice. He set it on the passenger seat. He looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure in front of him. He did not go inside. He sat there until the shape of it was fully settled, until he could hold the whole thing in his mind at once and see it clearly. Then he picked up his phone and called Cornell. His father answered on the first ring. "She's been having an affair," Darius said. "Over a year. The CFO at her hospital. That's what the accusation was covering." Cornell's voice was quiet and even. "She needed you looking the wrong direction. She needed me defending myself," Darius said. "Too busy to look at her." "She miscalculated," Cornell said. "She miscalculated," Darius said. That evening, Darius came home at his usual time. Patricia had made pasta. She set 2 plates on the table and poured sparkling water into both glasses and asked him how the Henderson site inspection had gone. He told her. She nodded in the right places. She twirled pasta around her fork and talked about a staffing meeting at the hospital that had run long, and he listened and asked a follow-up question, and she answered it. They were 2 people performing a marriage for an audience of each other. After dinner, he washed the dishes while she watched television in the living room. He dried his hands on the kitchen towel. He folded it over the oven handle the way he always did. Then he walked to the living room doorway and told her he had some project notes to go over. And she said, "Okay," without looking away from the screen, and he went to his office and closed the door. He sat down at his desk. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the email thread with Marcus and typed a short, specific message. "I need you to look at the younger sister, Brianna Holloway. Bank accounts, income, spending patterns going back 12 months. Anything that changed, and when it changed." He sent it. Then he sat in the quiet of his own office and listened to the sound of the television through the wall and the sound of his wife on the other side of it, and he waited for morning. The follow-up report took 6 days. Marcus was thorough. He was always thorough, which was why Andrea trusted him and why Darius was grateful for it now. Brianna's financial picture for the 12 months prior was exactly what you would expect from a woman living at the edge of her means and slightly beyond it. Rent paid late, twice. A credit card balance that had been growing steadily for 8 months. 2 small loans from individuals, not institutions, that had the informal, urgent quality of money borrowed from people who were running low on patience. She had been in real trouble. The kind of trouble that narrows your options down to a very small number and makes even bad options look acceptable. Then the picture changed. 3 weeks before the voice memo was recorded, a series of transfers began appearing in Brianna's account. Consistent, monthly, small enough individually that they would not trigger any automatic flag. Together, laid out in a column on the page Marcus had prepared. They were unambiguous. Someone was paying her on a schedule. The transfers originated from an account Darius did not recognize because it was not a joint account. It was personal. It had been opened in Patricia's name alone, and Darius had never known it existed. He read that page 3 times. Cornell had been working a separate angle the whole time, quietly, in the way Cornell did most things. He had a long-time connection in the Holloway social circle, a woman named Ruth, who had known Patricia and Brianna's parents for 30 years, and who talked to Cornell the way old friends talk when they are not being asked for information directly, but are simply catching up. Cornell had been catching up with Ruth twice a week. Ruth had mentioned, without knowing what it meant, that Brianna had been having a very hard time earlier in the year. Behind on everything. Stressed. Then Ruth had mentioned, equally without knowing what it meant, that things had seemed to stabilize for Brianna around the spring. New groceries in the apartment, rent paid, calmer somehow. Cornell passed this to Darius in a single phone call. No commentary, just the facts, laid flat and clean. The PI confirmed the last piece. The baby's father was a man named Terrence, someone Brianna had been loosely involved with on and off for several years. He lived 40 minutes away. He had no idea he had fathered a child. He was not part of any plan. He was simply the man whose peripheral presence in Brianna's life had produced the one thing Patricia needed most: a real pregnancy, with a real due date that could make an otherwise hollow accusation feel solid and credible. Patricia had not manufactured the pregnancy. She hadn't needed to. She had simply found it, already there inside her own family, and decided what it was worth to her. Darius put the documents down on his desk and sat very still. This was not a woman who had acted out of jealousy or desperation or a moment of bad judgment. Everything in front of him had a timeline. A separate account, opened in advance. Transfers calibrated to avoid attention. A sister already in financial trouble. Already primed to say yes to something she otherwise wouldn't. A real pregnancy used as a foundation for a false story. Every piece selected. Every piece placed. He picked up his phone and called Andrea. She answered on the second ring. He told her everything. The hidden account, the payment schedule, the timeline, Brianna's financial trouble, the actual father. He laid it out in the same order the documents laid it out, cleanly, without editorial. Andrea did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She didn't act on impulse, Andrea said. This was a project. She resourced it, scheduled it, and managed it. "How deep does it go?" Darius asked. "Let me find out," Andrea said. Andrea did not waste time. 2 days after Darius's call, she sent him a list: property records, loan agreements, business filings, joint account histories, every financial document connected to the Wade marriage going back 5 years. She wanted originals where he had them and scanned copies where he didn't. She wanted everything. "Don't tell Patricia you're pulling these," she said on the phone. "Don't mention it. Just get them." "She won't notice," Darius said. "Make sure of it." He spent 3 evenings going through the home filing cabinet, and the fireproof box in the closet shelf, and the folder of scanned documents he kept on a personal hard drive that Patricia had never asked about. He organized everything the way he organized a job site: by type, by date, by relevance. He put it all in a box and drove it to Andrea's office on a Tuesday morning. They sat across from each other at her conference table. She had already pulled public records on her end. She laid her documents beside his, and they began going through it together. It took 2 hours to find the shape of it. The investment property came first. Darius had purchased it 7 years ago, before the marriage was a year old. A small rental unit in a neighborhood he had watched carefully for 3 years before making the move. He had built equity in it steadily, independently, with money he earned before Patricia's income had ever merged with his. It was his, in every sense that mattered. 3 years ago, Patricia had suggested adding her name to the deed. He remembered the conversation. They were sitting in this same kitchen where they now performed their dinners. She had made a reasonable case: estate planning, simplicity, the way married people structure things for the long run. He had not hesitated. There was nothing to hesitate about. They were married. He trusted her. He signed the form and did not think about it again. Andrea placed the deed amendment on the table and set a second document beside it. A business loan, 18 months old. The investment property listed as collateral. Darius looked at his own signature on the loan agreement. He remembered signing it. Patricia had brought it home one evening, explained that a colleague had recommended a financial strategy for leveraging idle equity, and walked him through the summary page. He had read the summary. He had not read the full terms because the summary had been clear, and he had trusted the person handing it to him. The full terms, as Andrea now walked him through them, were not what the summary suggested. The beneficiary structure, Andrea said, turning a page and pressing it flat with 2 fingers, runs through a holding arrangement that took me a while to untangle. But it leads here. She placed a business filing on the table. Darius read the name at the top: PV Healthcare Consulting, LLC, formed 18 months ago, filed in a neighboring state. 2 members listed: Patricia Wade and Victor Ose. He looked at the filing, then at the loan agreement, then at the filing again. Andrea let him sit with it for a moment before she continued. The LLC has received funds, she said. Some of it traces back to draws made against the property loan. Some of it comes from the personal account she opened, the same account she used to pay Brianna. She stacked the documents into a neat column. She opened that account and formed the LLC the same month. Darius set the business filing down slowly. He had signed the loan agreement. He had signed it at the kitchen table, with a pen Patricia handed him, after a summary she prepared. He had put his name on a document that moved his own equity into a structure designed to fund her way out of their marriage, and into a future she had already begun building with another man. The LLC is described as a consulting partnership, Andrea continued, but it has no clients on record, no contracts, no service revenue of any kind. It exists to hold money. That's all it has ever done. Darius was quiet for a long moment. She used my property to fund it, he said. Partially, yes. He looked at the window. Outside, the street was ordinary. A delivery truck, someone walking a dog. A normal Tuesday morning. He looked at it for a few seconds, and then he looked back at Andrea. She explained the full picture in the straightforward way she always did, without softening the edges. If Patricia had initiated the divorce while Darius was publicly managing Brianna's accusation, his legal position would have been weakened before he ever sat down at a negotiating table. Her attorney would have introduced the accusation, not as a proven fact, but as a pending matter, a cloud of credibility that would have followed him through every proceeding. Darius would have been fighting to clear his name in one room while fighting to protect his finances in another. Divided, slower, easier to outmaneuver. The financial arrangement would have been in place. The assets would have been repositioned. The exit would have already been built. Andrea set her pen down on the table. She looked at him directly. She planned to leave you with significantly less than you're entitled to, she said. She didn't plan for you to look before she was ready. Darius kept his eyes on the documents in front of him. 12 years of his life, laid out in columns and filing dates and account numbers. What can we recover? He asked. Andrea picked her pen back up. More than she built for, she said, because she designed this for a man who wouldn't see it coming. Darius was back at Andrea's office by 8 the next morning. He had not slept well. He had not expected to. He sat in his office until almost 2 in the morning, going back over everything, the PI reports, the financial records, the business filings, not because he needed to review them again, but because he needed to be certain. Absolutely certain. The kind of certain you can only get by looking at a thing one more time in the quiet dark when no one is watching you look. By the time he drove to Andrea's office, the morning sun was still low, and the streets were mostly empty. He carried the box of documents under his arm the same way he carried blueprints on a job site. Same weight, same purpose. Andrea was already at her desk when he arrived. Coffee going? Legal pad open? "You ready to authorize?" she said. "Yes," he said. He sat down. She walked him through each step in the sequence she had prepared, not asking for his opinion on the order, because the order was correct and they both knew it. She laid it out the way a surgeon lays out instruments before an operation. Precise, deliberate, everything in its place before the first cut. The divorce filing went first, sealed, not yet served. That was important. Serving Patricia now would trigger her to move, and Andrea wanted the asset freeze in place before Patricia had any reason to make a phone call or open a browser and start repositioning things. The freeze came second. Joint accounts, the investment property, any instrument tied to both their names. Andrea had already drafted the motion. She slid it across the table for Darius to review. He read it carefully. Every line. He signed at the bottom. "She'll try to move something when the papers land," Darius said. "She'll find she can't," Andrea said. The third document was the referral. Andrea had spent 2 evenings building the written record of her reasoning, the LLC structure, the loan beneficiary arrangement, the timing of the account openings, the absence of any legitimate business activity. She believed the arrangement crossed from aggressive financial planning into fraud, and she was not the kind of attorney who made that observation privately and left it unused. She slid the referral across the table. Darius read it. The language was careful, precise, and devastating. "You're sure about this one?" he said. "I'm sure," she said. He nodded once. She signed it. She would send it herself that afternoon. Cornell made the first call to Brianna on a Wednesday. Darius had asked him carefully, explained what he needed, explained that Cornell should not lie to her, should not press her, should simply call as the man he had always been to her. The familiar older presence, the one who used to bring a bag of candy to the Holloway family cookouts, and remembered birthdays and asked genuine questions. Brianna had always liked Cornell. That was the point. The call lasted 22 minutes. Cornell asked about the pregnancy, asked how she was feeling, whether she was eating right, whether the baby was moving yet. He asked if Patricia was helping. Brianna said yes, that Patricia had been looking after her, that things were more stable now than they had been a few months ago. She said it the way people say things to someone they trust completely, casually, without thinking about the shape of the words. Cornell listened. He asked gentle follow-up questions. He let the silences breathe. The second call came 4 days later. Shorter, warmer. Brianna mentioned the payments again without being asked, referenced them as routine, as part of an arrangement she expected to continue through the end of the pregnancy. She said Patricia had been clear about that. She did not know she was handing Cornell the last piece Darius needed. Cornell called Darius after the second call ended. He did not editorialize. He simply said, "She confirmed everything, both calls." "Good," Darius said. "She trusts me," Cornell said. There was something quiet in his voice when he said it. Not regret exactly, but something. "I know," Darius said. "You didn't lie to her, Dad." "No," Cornell said. "I didn't." Darius called Earl and Diane Holloway on a Thursday evening. He had thought carefully about how to open the call. He did not want to sound angry. He did not want to sound wounded. He wanted to sound like a man who had been wronged and was asking, reasonably, for the chance to clear his name in front of the people who mattered to him. He told Earl that he had been living under a serious false accusation for months. He said he understood the family was in a difficult position, He said he was not calling to create conflict. He was calling because he respected them, and he wanted the truth on the table in front of people he trusted. Earl was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would talk to Diane. Darius thanked him and got off the phone. Patricia came to him 2 days later. She told him her parents had agreed to the gathering. Her shoulders had dropped slightly, the specific loosening of a person who has been holding tension and just released some of it. She thought she knew what this meeting was about. She thought the sealing of Darius's knowledge was Brianna's accusation. She thought this was the part where everyone sat down and the story got managed and she retained control of the room. "I think this is the right thing," she said. "I think it'll be good for everyone to talk." Darius looked at her. "I think so too," he said. She left the room. He watched her go. The night before the gathering, Darius sat at his office desk and prepared 3 printed document packages. Each one was organized the same way. Same order, same tabs, same clarity. He worked slowly. He was not in a hurry. He did not sleep much when he finally went to bed. In the morning he showered, dressed, and stood in the kitchen drinking coffee while the house was still quiet around him. He called Cornell at 7. "I'm ready," he said. Cornell said, "I know you are." The Holloway house was a red brick split level on a quiet street with a magnolia tree in the front yard that Diane had planted the year Patricia was born. Darius had stood under that tree at cookouts, at holidays, at the birthday parties of nieces and nephews who called him Uncle D. He knew this house the way you know places you stopped being a guest at long ago. He arrived 20 minutes early. Diane met him at the door with cautious warmth, a hug that was genuine but careful, the kind a woman gives when she is hoping for good news and not yet sure she is going to get it. Earl shook his hand and held it a beat longer than usual. They were good people. They had always been good people. That was the part that made this hard and necessary at the same time. Darius sat at the dining room table. He set his folder down in front of him and folded his hands on top of it. He accepted the coffee Diane offered. He answered Earl's small talk about the weather and the neighborhood with patience and care, because Earl and Diane deserved that. They had done nothing wrong. Patricia arrived 12 minutes later. She came through the front door with her coat still on, her eyes moving to Darius first, and then to the folder under his hands. Something registered in her face, brief and quickly controlled. "Darius," she said. "Patricia," he said. She sat down across from him. She removed her coat slowly, deliberately, the way people move when they are managing their own stillness. Brianna came last. She stepped through the door looking like someone who had rehearsed being calm and could already feel the rehearsal failing. Her eyes went to Patricia immediately. A reflex, a child looking for the adult who is supposed to have this handled. She sat down at the far end of the table and placed both hands in her lap, and did not look at Darius. The room settled. Darius opened the folder. He did not make a speech. He did not explain what was coming, or ask if everyone was ready. He simply reached into the folder and removed the first document, a clean, single-page summary, and slid it across the table to Earl. Hotel receipts, call records, dates and locations laid out in 2 neat columns, 14 months. Every Thursday that Patricia had said she was working late. Earl looked down at the page. He picked it up. His face went very still. Darius removed the second document and slid it to Diane. The bank transfer records, Patricia's private account, Brianna's account. 22 weeks of scheduled deposits, each one small, each one timed, beginning 3 weeks before the voice memo was recorded. Diane took the page with both hands. She read it slowly. The third document Darius placed in the center of the table. Andrea's summary. Brianna's own words from 2 phone calls, describing Patricia's payments, describing the arrangement as ongoing, describing being looked after. He let the room sit with the papers for a moment. Then he looked at Brianna directly. "Tell your parents," he said. why you made that recording." The room came apart. Brianna's composure lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then her chin went down, and her shoulders came up, and the tears came in the specific way of someone who is not crying from remorse, but from the unbearable sensation of being seen, fully and clearly, by the two people whose opinion of her she could not afford to lose. She said she hadn't wanted to, that she hadn't had a choice, that Patricia had told her it would be fine, that nobody was supposed to get hurt like this. Patricia said her name, sharp and low, a warning, which was its own answer. Earl looked up from the paper. His mouth opened. He started a sentence and could not finish it. He stood up. He looked at his daughters, first Patricia, then Brianna, and something moved across his face that was not anger exactly. It was older and worse than anger. He sat back down. Diane had not moved. She was still holding the transfer record in both hands, staring at the numbers on the page, and the silence coming off her was the loudest thing in the room. Patricia turned to Darius. She said his name the way she used to say it, softly, with weight behind it, with the history of 12 years pressed into those 3 syllables like something she had saved and was spending now. She talked about what they had built. She talked about what they had been to each other. She looked at him with an expression that, in another life, in a version of events where none of these documents existed, might have meant something. He looked back at her steadily. "You turned your sister into a weapon," he said, "and aimed her at me." He kept his voice level. "You moved our money while I was sleeping beside you. You were building a way out, while I was still building a life." He picked up his folder. "There is nothing left to appeal to, Patricia. You took it all apart yourself." He stood. "Andrea Price will be in touch." He walked out of the Holloway house for the last time. He sat in his car in the driveway without starting it. He had expected to feel something clean. He did not. What he felt was heavier than that. A deep, settled exhaustion. The specific kind that comes not from losing, but from finishing something that cost a great deal to finish. He sat with it for a while. Then he started the car and drove to Cornell's house. Cornell opened the door. He looked at Darius's face and read everything in it without asking a single question. He stepped aside to let him in. The papers were served at 8:47 in the morning. Darius knew the exact time because Andrea texted him when it was done. 2 words, "It's running." He read it sitting at the small table in his rental, a furnished 1-bedroom off a side street, beige walls, thin carpet, a window that looked out onto a parking lot. He set the phone face down and drank his coffee. Patricia called him at 9:14. He watched her name on the screen until it stopped. She called again at 9:31, then a third time at 9:45. He let all 3 go. What she was doing between the calls, he could piece together without being there to see it. She would have opened her banking app. She would have found the transfer function grayed out. The balances visible but untouchable. Everything she had been quietly repositioning now locked in place by a court order, with her name on it. She would have tried again. It would have failed again. The third attempt would have felt like hitting a wall with her shoulder. The same wall in the same place, producing the same result. Then she called Andrea. Andrea picked up on the third ring. "All joint assets are frozen as of this morning," Andrea told her. "That includes the personal accounts, the investment property, and all associated instruments. Any attempt to transfer, liquidate, or reposition those assets will be treated as contempt of court. If you want to discuss the proceedings, have your attorney call my office." Patricia said something. Darius didn't know what. He would never ask. Andrea said, "Have your attorney call my office," and ended the call. The LLC referral had been sitting on a financial investigator's desk for 11 days. When Victor Osei's name surfaced in the external filing, the investigation moved from pending to active in under 24 hours. Victor's attorney called him that afternoon. The conversation, Darius imagined, was the kind that strips a man down to pure calculation very quickly. The attorney laying out the exposure, the possible findings, the difference between cooperating now and not cooperating now rendered in the specific language of consequences. Victor was a man who had spent his career managing institutional risk. He understood immediately what he was looking at. He provided documentation within 48 hours, all of it. The LLC formation records, the structuring decisions, his own correspondence with Patricia, including emails that described the asset movement in language that left very little room for interpretation. He handed it over cleanly, completely, with the efficiency of a man who has already made his calculation and is not interested in revisiting it. He did not call Patricia first. He did not warn her. He simply gave investigators what they needed in exchange for what his attorney negotiated and moved on to the next problem. Patricia learned what he had done through her own attorney, who called her the following morning. Whatever she felt about it, Darius did not know and did not need to know. What mattered was that the documentation was in, the findings were moving, and Victor Ossie had confirmed everything Andrea had already laid out in the referral. Victor's wife was notified of the investigation's scope through her own legal counsel 3 days later. She filed for divorce within the week. She did not make a statement. She did not contact anyone peripheral to the matter. She simply filed, and in doing so communicated everything that needed to be communicated. The hospital's internal audit had been running quietly alongside the external referral. When it surfaced, 2 years of procurement irregularities managed through Victor's CFO access, small redirections, consistently below the threshold that triggered automatic review, the kind of thing that requires both access and patience to construct, his position became untenable in the specific way that senior positions become untenable when the institution needs to be seen acting decisively. He announced his resignation before anyone asked him to leave. The statement used words like personal decision and new chapter. Nobody in the building was confused about what it meant. 6 months later, he was consulting independently. His name preceded him into every new room in the way that certain names do after certain events. Not loudly, but persistently. A quiet search result that clients found before the first meeting and carried with them to it. He worked, he earned, he got by. But the career he had spent 20 years building, floor by floor, was done. That version of Victor Ossie was done. Patricia's professional footing did not outlast his protection. The performance review that should have been routine became, in the new climate, something else entirely. She was not fired. The hospital did not fire her. What they did was restructure. A lateral reassignment presented in the careful language of organizational efficiency. A different title, a different floor, a smaller orbit. Everyone in the building read it for exactly what it was, and nobody said so out loud. And that particular silence was its own verdict. Brianna moved back into her parents' home with her infant daughter 2 weeks after the payments stopped. Earl and Diane received her the way good parents receive a child who has done a wrong thing, with love that does not waver, and with a distance that cannot be closed by love alone. They held the baby. They made up the room. They sat at the same table they had always sat at together. But the table had changed. Earl's silences were careful now in a way they hadn't been before. Diane's eyes sometimes went somewhere private when Brianna spoke, returning a half-second later, the gap small enough that you could almost miss it. Brianna noticed every time. She was learning the specific weight of trust that has been spent, how it does not disappear, how the people who held it do not stop loving you, how it simply no longer rests the way it used to rest, and how that difference lives in every ordinary moment from that point forward. She would be paying for what she did for a long time. Not in money. In that. Andrea called at 7:30 that evening. The proceedings are structured and running. she said. Everything is executing in sequence. The findings from Victor's cooperation are going to be useful. I'll have more specifics next week, but I wanted you to know tonight. It's going the way it should go. Thank you, Andrea, Darius said. For all of it. That's what I'm here for, she said. And she hung up. He sat at the small table in the rental for a while after that. At some point, he reached into his bag and pulled out a blank sheet of drafting paper. He set it on the table in front of him and uncapped a pencil. He did not have a project in mind. He did not have a client or a brief or a set of specifications to work from. He just began to sketch. A house. Simple lines at first. The rectangle of a foundation. The angle of a roof. Walls that went where he decided they should go and bore the load he chose to give them. A front door positioned for morning light. A room at the back with a large window for the evenings. Nothing that existed anywhere yet. Nothing that belonged to anyone else. Just the outline of something entirely his, taking shape under his hand in the quiet of the rental, in the small circle of light above the table. The site was loud before the sun was fully up. Heavy equipment moving dirt. A concrete truck idling at the edge of the lot. Voices calling across the distance between one crew and another in the specific shorthand of men who have learned to communicate over noise. Darius stepped out of his truck, set his hard hat on his head, and stood at the chain-link fence, looking at what was being built. It was the largest contract his firm had ever won. A municipal infrastructure project. A rebuilt drainage corridor running 6 city blocks. The kind of work that does not get noticed until it isn't there. The kind of work that matters for 50 years. He had put the bid together himself over 2 weeks last spring, in the evenings, at his drafting table. He had submitted it without telling anyone what it would mean to get it. When the call came, he was on a smaller job site across town. He said thank you, and he meant it. And then he went back to what he had been doing. He stood at the fence now and watched his crew move through the site with the coordinated efficiency of people who know their work and trust the man who organized it. 6 of them now. He had hired the 6th, a young engineer named Marcus, 2 years out of school, sharp enough to make Darius's job easier. The month after the divorce was finalized. He watched the site for a long time. Then he put on his gloves and went in. Saturdays still belonged to the football field. The kids were 11 and 12 years old, all of them at the age where the gap between effort and ability is still closing, and you can see it closing in real time if you know what to watch for. Darius knew what to watch for. He had known since Cornell stood at a similar fence and watched him for the same signs at the same age. Cornell came to every game now. He drove over in the morning, brought 2 coffees from the same place he'd been going to for 15 years, and stood at the fence with his cup and his coat and his unhurried attention. Darius would catch a glimpse of him between plays, still, patient, eyes on the field. They didn't talk about Patricia at the games. They had stopped talking about Patricia some time ago, not by agreement, just by the natural process of a subject losing its hold on the present tense. They talked about which kids had something real in them. They talked about a halfback named Terrence, who ran with his head down and needed to learn to see the field. They talked about the plays that worked, and the ones that didn't, and what the difference was between the two. That was the best part of Darius's week. It had been for a while now. Andrea called on a Tuesday afternoon in early November. "Final settlement terms are confirmed," she said. "I want you to understand what that means in actual numbers." She walked him through it. The recovery on the investment property, the financial misconduct findings, and what they produced in the division of marital assets, the LLC judgment, and where those funds went. The total was significantly better than any standard dissolution would have generated. It was better because Patricia's plan had left a trail, and the trail had been followed, and the law had been applied to everything it found at the end of it. "She didn't end up where she planned," Andrea said. "No," Darius said. "She didn't." "You did," Andrea said. He thanked her. He set the phone down on the drafting table and looked at the plans in front of him for a moment. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to work. There was no ceremony in it. That was the point. Patricia had relocated 9 months after the divorce was finalized. Cornell mentioned it once, in passing, after hearing it through a mutual connection in the extended family network. Another city, a smaller position, a life that had contracted in every dimension she had spent her energy expanding. Darius received the information the way you receive a weather update for a place you no longer live. Noted it, processed it, set it down. He did not carry it with him. Brianna called once, 14 months out, blocked number. But he knew the quality of the silence before her voice came through. Careful, braced, the silence of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say and is still not sure it will be enough. He let her say she was sorry. She said it plainly, without decoration. She did not explain herself or ask for anything. He said, "I know you are." He ended the call. Not cruelty, just honest arithmetic. She was sorry. That was real. And it was not fine. Not in the clean, resolved way the word usually means. Both of those things were true at the same time, and they would stay true without requiring anything further from him. He had made his peace with holding them both. He set the phone down and did not think about it again that night. He was at his drafting table before dawn. His house was quiet around him, small, deliberate. Every room exactly where he had decided it should be, over 3 months of evenings in the rental, with a pencil and a blank sheet of paper. Smaller than the marriage house. Entirely his. The front door caught the morning light the way he had planned for it to catch the morning light. And the room at the back had the window he had wanted, and none of it belonged to anyone else. The plans for the community youth center were spread across the table. A full building project, gymnasium, meeting rooms, a corridor of offices for program staff. He had been invited to lead it because of his professional reputation, which had survived everything intact, which had survived everything because it was built on actual work and actual results, and could not be lifted from him by someone else's lie. He picked up his pencil. He drew the load-bearing walls first. He always did. Cornell had taught him that. Not with those words, not about buildings specifically, but in the way he raised a son. Put the strong things in first, get them right, and build the rest around them, knowing they will hold. He drew them strong. Outside his window, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edge, that first thin change in the dark, the color that comes before color. The city was stirring somewhere below it, slow and unhurried, the way mornings are before they become days. It was going to be a good day. He kept drawing. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.